The one who can save you from the darkness isn't always a king or a conqueror, but sometimes a simple man in a forgotten corner of the world. The key to finding your soul may not lie in a palace of gold, but in a cabin of rough-hewn logs, warmed by a fire of quiet decency. This is a story about how the deepest wounds are not always the ones that bleed, and how true wealth is measured in the currency of kindness, a story that reminds us that sometimes you have to get lost to truly be found. The forest was breathing. A deep, wet sigh of pine and damp earth rose with the encroaching dusk, a prelude to the storm that was gathering its dark robes in the west. Inside the small, sturdy cabin nestled in the heart of the woods, a different kind of warmth pushed back against the chill. Liam, a man whose face was a roadmap of quiet sorrows and resilient strength, stoked the fire. The flames danced, casting long, wavering shadows on the walls, shadows that seemed to hold the memories of the life he had built here. His twin daughters, Amy and Renee, with their identical braids of honey-blonde hair and eyes the color of the summer sky, were setting the simple wooden table for dinner. They were only 9 years old, but they moved with a gentle competence, their small hands a perfect, miniature echo of their late mothers. It was a life of solitude, a life carved out of loss, but it was their life. It was peaceful, until the peace was shattered. The cabin door burst open with a crash of splintering wood and a gust of wind, bringing with it the scent of rain and fear. The girls stood there, their faces pale, their eyes wide with a terror that stole Liam's breath. They were not alone. Propped between them, her arms draped limply over their small shoulders, was a woman. Her clothes, a designer jacket and pants that even in their torn and mud-caked state screamed of unimaginable expense, were in tatters. Her dark hair was matted with blood, and from a wicked gash on her temple, a slow crimson river trickled down her unnervingly still face. She was unconscious, a broken doll of impossible wealth, abandoned in their world of humble survival. Liam's past surged forward, a reflex honed in another life, another world, where chaos was the norm. The quiet woodsman vanished, and the focused, calm medic he once was took over. He swept the woman into his arms, surprised by how light she felt, a fragile bird beneath the expensive fabric. He laid her gently on the worn rug before the hearth, the firelight flickering over her pale, aristocratic features. "Amy, Renee, get the kit," he commanded, his voice steady, a rock for his terrified daughters to cling to. They didn't hesitate. They scurried to a large wooden chest in the corner, a chest that held not toys, but bandages, antiseptics, and sutures, remnants of their father's former profession. As he began his assessment, his hands moving with practiced efficiency, he saw that her injuries were not the result of a simple fall. A long, deep slice on her forearm looked defensive, as if she'd thrown her arm up to ward off a blade. There was a graze high on her shoulder, a burn mark puckering the skin that he knew instantly. It wasn't a burn from a branch or a rock. It was the scorching kiss of a bullet. A profound chill, colder than the coming storm, settled deep in his bones. This was not a lost hiker. This was a hunted animal, and his daughters had just let the hunt to their door. The wind howled outside, and the first fat drops of rain began to beat a frantic rhythm on the roof, trapping them all inside with a beautiful, bleeding mystery lying at their feet. The world had just become very small and very, very dangerous. The woman's breathing was shallow, a faint whisper of life in the heavy silence of the cabin. Liam worked methodically, cleaning the wounds with a quiet intensity that held his own fear at bay. The cut on her temple was deep, the source of most of the blood, but it had missed the artery. He stitched it with a steady hand, the needle a familiar tool from a life he thought he had buried. The bullet graze was a mercy. A few inches lower, and it would have shattered her collarbone or worse. He disinfected it, his touch gentle but firm, his mind racing. Who was she? And who was it that would hunt a person down in this remote wilderness with such vicious intent? The girls watched him, their initial shock giving way to a solemn curiosity. They had seen their father tend to injured animals before, a bird with a broken wing, a fawn caught in a wire fence. They had never seen him work on a person, not with this grim, focused silence. They saw the shift in him, the reawakening of a part of their father they never knew existed. He was more than just the man who taught them how to track deer and identify constellations. He was a protector, a healer. When he was done, they helped him move her to the small guest cot in the corner, covering her with one of their mother's handmade quilts. The storm broke then, a furious, theatrical display of nature's power. The rain came down in solid sheets, and the wind screamed through the pines. A brilliant flash of lightning was followed by an instantaneous, deafening crack of thunder. The lights flickered once, twice, and then died, plunging the cabin into the primal, intimate glow of the fire. They were an island in a raging sea of darkness, cut off from the world. And on that island, a stranger lay sleeping, her secrets a silent storm within their own. Hours passed, marked only by the relentless drumming of the rain and the crackle of the fire. Liam sat in his worn armchair, a shotgun he hadn't touched in years resting across his lap. He was not a man given to paranoia, but the bullet graze on the woman's shoulder was a testament to a threat that was real and lethal. His gaze drifted from the dark windows to the woman on the cot. In sleep, her face was stripped of the tension and fear that must have defined her last waking moments. He could see the fine lines of her cheekbones, the elegant arch of her brow. She was a creature of a different world, a world of polish and privilege. He wondered what she would think of their simple life, their humble cabin, if she were awake. Would she see it as a sanctuary or a prison? It was just after midnight when she stirred. A low moan, a flutter of eyelids. Liam was by her side in an instant. Her eyes opened, a startling, deep shade of blue, but they were clouded with confusion and pain. They darted around the rustic room, taking in the log walls, the flickering firelight, the strange man leaning over her. Fear, sharp and primal, flashed across her face. She tried to sit up, a gasp of pain escaping her lips as her injuries protested. "Where am I? Who are you?" she demanded, her voice a hoarse, ragged whisper, but edged with an unmistakable tone of command. It was the voice of someone accustomed to being in charge, of getting answers, of controlling her environment, and she was in control of nothing. This realization seemed to terrify her more than the pain. Liam held up his hands in a placating gesture. "You're safe," he said, his voice calm and low. "My daughters found you in the woods. You're hurt. I'm helping you." Her eyes narrowed, suspicion eclipsing the fear. "Safe?" she repeated, the word tasting like a lie on her tongue. "No one is safe." The woman Isabella, though they did not yet know her name, remained on high alert. She refused the water Liam offered, her eyes tracking his every move, searching for the slightest hint of a threat. She saw a big man, his shoulders broad, his hands calloused from work, but his eyes held a gentleness that was disarming. It was a contradiction she couldn't immediately reconcile, and it put her further on edge. In her world, gentleness was a mask, a tool used to conceal a hidden agenda. She surveyed the room again, her gaze lingering on the two small figures of Amy and Renee, who were huddled together on a nearby bench, watching her with wide, curious eyes. Children. Her mind, still groggy from the head wound, struggled to process their presence. They didn't fit the narrative of a kidnapping or an attack. They were an anomaly. Liam, sensing her internal battle, took a step back, giving her space. "The storm is bad," he said simply, gesturing towards the window where rain lashed against the glass. "The roads will be washed out. You'll have to stay here until it passes." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a statement of fact. For a moment, a flicker of something desperate and wild crossed her face, the look of a caged animal. But her body was a traitor, and a wave of dizziness forced her to lie back down, her head spinning. The fight drained out of her, replaced by a weary, resentful resignation. She turned her face to the wall, a clear dismissal. Liam accepted it without a word. He understood fear. He understood trauma. He would give her time. He motioned for the girls to go to their room, a small loft above the main living area. They went reluctantly, casting backward glances at the mysterious woman who had fallen into their lives. Liam settled back into his chair, the shotgun still within reach, and prepared for a long, watchful night. The storm outside raged on, a perfect mirror for the tempest of secrets and fear that now resided within the four walls of his home. As the first pale fingers of dawn crept through the cabin window, they found a scene of tense stillness. Liam had not slept. He had spent the night watching, listening to the sounds of the dying storm and the stranger's fitful breathing. He had brewed a pot of strong coffee on the wood stove, its bitter, earthy scent filling the small space. The woman was awake, her gaze fixed on the ceiling. She hadn't moved, but he knew the moment she had surfaced from sleep, a subtle tensing of her frame, a shift in the rhythm of her breath. He rose and walked over to the cot, holding out a steaming mug. "Coffee," he said. It was an offering, a simple gesture of peace. She looked at the mug, then at his face, her expression unreadable. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, slowly, she pushed herself into a sitting position, wincing as she moved. She took the mug from him, her fingers brushing his. Her skin was soft, unaccustomed to labor, a stark contrast to his own rough hands. She sipped the coffee, the warmth seeming to fortify her. "I don't have any money to pay you," she said, her voice stronger now, but clipped and formal. It was a test, a way to gauge his intentions. Liam simply nodded. "I'm not asking for any." He turned and walked back to the fireplace, adding another log to the embers. Her eyes followed him, a flicker of confusion in their depths. She was used to transactions, to a world where every action had a price, every kindness a hidden cost. This simple, unconditional care was a foreign language to her. Just then, a sound from outside cut through the morning quiet, a low, mechanical hum, growing steadily louder. Liam's body went rigid. He moved to the window, peering cautiously through a gap in the curtains. His heart sank. In the distance, half hidden by the misty trees at the edge of his property, was a black SUV. It was moving slowly, methodically, as if searching. They weren't just random hunters. They were organized, and they were close. The sight of the vehicle sent a jolt of adrenaline through Liam. He turned from the window, his expression grim. The woman on the cot saw the change in his face, and a new wave of fear washed over her. "What is it?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "What did you see?" Liam didn't answer immediately. He moved swiftly and silently, extinguishing the main lamp, leaving the room lit only by the low fire. He gestured for her to be quiet, his finger to his lips. He then crept to the door, listening. The sound of the engine was clearer now, a persistent, threatening drone that didn't belong in these woods. It was the sound of the world they had tried to escape, a world of power and violence, and it was hunting them. The woman pushed herself off the cot, ignoring the sharp protest from her body. She stumbled to the window, needing to see for herself. Through the rain-streaked glass, she saw it, the sleek, black shape of an SUV, its tinted windows hiding whoever was inside. It was the same type of vehicle her uncle's security detail used. A sob caught in her throat. They had found her, or at least, they had found her general location. Her escape had bought her time, but it hadn't bought her freedom. She looked at Liam, her eyes wide with panic. "They're looking for me," she whispered, the words a confirmation of his worst fears. "We have to hide." Liam's mind was already working, his old training kicking in, assessing threats, planning escape routes. But there were no escape routes. The storm had washed out the only road, and the woods were treacherous, swarming with unseen enemies. The cabin, once a sanctuary, had become a trap, and he and his daughters were caught in it with her. He pulled her away from the window, his grip on her arm firm but not rough. "Stay away from the windows. Don't make a sound." He then looked toward the loft where his daughters were sleeping, and a fierce, protective instinct, raw and powerful, rose in him. He would not let this danger touch them. The SUV eventually moved on, its sound fading back into the dripping quiet of the forest. But the relief that followed was thin and temporary. They knew the searchers would be back. The brief sighting had shattered the fragile peace of the morning, replacing it with a humming, palpable tension. The woman, whose name was Isabella, though she had not yet offered it, sank onto a chair, her face a mask of despair. The fight had gone out of her again, replaced by a chilling fatalism. She had run, she had fought, and it had all been for nothing. Liam, however, was galvanized. The threat to his children had ignited a fire in him. He began to check the cabin's defenses, the simple locks on the doors, and the latches on the windows. They were designed to keep out the cold and the occasional bear, not determined men with weapons. He thought of the woods, the terrain he knew better than the back of his own hand. That was his only advantage. While he moved, the girls came down from the loft, their faces scrubbed clean, their hair neatly braided. They sensed the charged atmosphere immediately. Renee, always the more direct of the two, walked over to Isabella. "Are you scared?" she asked, her voice small and clear. Isabella looked up, surprised by the question. She had been surrounded by adults who were either afraid of her or wanted to use her fear against her. No one had ever asked her so simply about her feelings. She found herself unable to lie to the child's earnest face. "Yes," she whispered, the admission costing her a great deal of her pride. "I am." Amy, who was quieter and more observant, came forward and held out a small, crudely carved wooden bird. "This is for you," she said softly. "Daddy says it helps to hold on to something when you're scared. Mama used to hold it." Isabella stared at the small object in the girl's hand. It was a simple, unpolished thing, but it was offered with such unadulterated sincerity, it felt heavier than gold. Tentatively, she reached out and took it. The wood was smooth and warm. For the first time in a very long time, someone had offered her comfort without wanting anything in return. A strange, unfamiliar warmth spread through her chest, a tiny pinprick of light in her vast, internal darkness. The small act of kindness from the child seemed to unlock something in Isabella. It was a key turning in a rust-caked lock. As she clutched the wooden bird, a memory, sharp and vivid, broke through the fog of her pain and fear. A flashback to another world, a world of cold marble and colder hearts. She was in a vast, sterile boardroom, the air thick with a scent of expensive leather and ambition. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the skyline of a city she owned but had never truly felt a part of. Across the polished mahogany table sat her uncle, Arthur Vance, a man with a warm smile that never reached his cold, calculating eyes. They were arguing. She had just announced her intention to divert a significant percentage of the company's profits into a new charitable foundation, one focused on environmental cleanup and sustainable technology. "It's a waste of capital, Isabella," Arthur had said, his voice a low, dangerous purr. "Our shareholders expect growth, not philanthropy. Your father would have never." "I am not my father," she had cut him off, her voice ringing with a conviction she hadn't known she possessed. "And this company will no longer build its legacy on the back of a dying planet. Things are going to change." The look on Arthur's face was one she would never forget. The mask of the concerned, avuncular relative had slipped, and for a terrifying second, she saw the predator beneath. He saw her not as his niece, but as an obstacle, a sentimental fool threatening to dismantle the empire he had always believed should be his. The memory faded, leaving a bitter taste in her mouth. She looked around the rustic cabin, at the man quietly reinforcing a window latch, at the two young girls watching her with open, honest faces. She had been fighting for an abstract ideal, for a better world. But here, in this humble place, was a better world in miniature, a world built not on profit and power, but on care and protection. And she had dragged her own violent, broken world right to its doorstep. Liam finished his quiet preparations, his movements economical and purposeful. He had brought in extra firewood, filled every spare container with water from the well, and strategically placed their few lanterns. He was preparing for a siege. He glanced at Isabella. He saw the shift in her, the way she clutched the small wooden bird, her knuckles white. Her armor was cracking, not from his questions, but from his daughter's simple, intuitive grace. He decided to try again, not to interrogate, but to connect. He sat at the table opposite her, placing a bowl of warm oatmeal in front of her. "You need to eat?" he said, his tone gentle but firm. "You'll need your strength." She stared at the bowl. It was a stark contrast to the delicate, artfully arranged breakfasts she was used to, served on fine china by silent staff. This was simple, unadorned sustenance. She picked up the spoon. The oatmeal was warm and sweet, with a hint of cinnamon. It tasted real. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice low. "Hiding me, helping me. You don't know who I am." "I could be a criminal." Liam met her gaze, his own eyes clear and steady. "I know you were hurt. I know someone is trying to hurt you more. And I know you were brought to my home by my daughters. That's all I need to know." His words were simple, declarative, and utterly profound. They cut through the layers of cynicism and mistrust that had been her shield for years. In her life, everyone had an angle, a motive. To be offered help without a price tag was so foreign, it felt like a miracle. For the second time since her arrival, she felt the sting of tears behind her eyes. She fought them back, her pride a stubborn, deeply ingrained habit, but a wall inside her had crumbled. She took another spoonful of oatmeal, the simple meal a sacrament of trust in the quiet, firelit cabin. The world outside could hunt her, but for a fleeting moment, she felt a glimmer of something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. The day wore on in a state of suspended animation. Every creak of the cabin, every snap of a twig outside, sent a fresh jolt of anxiety through the air. Liam tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy for the girls. He had them work on their lessons, their small heads bent over books at the kitchen table. But their attention constantly strayed to the windows, to the silent, watching woods. Isabella, meanwhile, remained mostly quiet, lost in her own thoughts. The warmth of the food and the relative safety of the cabin had allowed her body to begin the slow process of healing, but her mind was a whirlwind. She kept replaying her uncle's face, the cold fury in his eyes. She had underestimated him. She had seen him as a corporate rival, a boardroom shark. She had never imagined he was a monster, capable of ordering her death. Her naivete felt colossal, a fatal flaw that had nearly cost her her life and was now endangering this innocent family. She watched Liam as he sat with his daughters, patiently explaining a math problem. He had a quiet strength, a deep well of patience she had never witnessed in any man, least of all her own father. Her father had been a titan of industry, a man who commanded respect and fear in equal measure. He had given her everything money could buy, the best schools, cars, a life of unimaginable luxury. But he had never given her this. He had never sat with her and simply been present. He was a ghost in her childhood, a booming voice on the phone, a distant figure at the head of a lawn dinner table. The loneliness of that gilded cage felt more profound than ever. Sitting here in this cabin filled with a love that was as tangible as the scent of wood smoke. She was beginning to understand that she had been impoverished in ways she was only now beginning to comprehend. The black SUV did not return that day, but its presence lingered, a shadow hanging over them, a promise of violence yet to come. As afternoon bled into a gray, somber evening, Liam decided they needed a distraction, a brief return to the familiar rhythms of their life. "Come on," he said to the girls, his voice intentionally light. "Time to check the snares." It was a daily ritual, a small but necessary part of their self-sufficient existence. Amy and Renee's faces lit up, eager for a task, for a reason to move. Isabella watched them, a pang of something akin to envy twisting inside her. She had never known such simple, purposeful routines. Her days had been a blur of meetings, calls, and empty social obligations, a life of perpetual motion that led nowhere meaningful. Can I come?" she asked, the question hesitant, almost shy. She felt a desperate need for fresh air, to escape the claustrophobia of the cabin and her own racing thoughts. Liam studied her for a moment. It was a risk, but keeping her cooped up, a prisoner of her own fear, was also a risk. "All right," he said, nodding. "But you stay close. No sound." He found a spare jacket for her, one that had belonged to his wife. It was worn and smelled faintly of lavender and wood smoke. As Isabella slipped it on, the simple domestic scent was so unexpectedly comforting that it almost brought her to her knees. It felt like an embrace from a ghost, a warmth from a life of love she had never known. The four of them stepped outside. The air was crisp and clean after the storm, the forest floor a carpet of damp leaves. For the first time, Isabella saw the cabin and its surroundings in the daylight. It was small, even rustic, but it was nestled in a clearing of breathtaking beauty, surrounded by ancient, towering pines. It was a place of peace, a peace she had brought into jeopardy. As they walked, Liam moved with the silent grace of a man who was part of the forest, his daughters flitting around him like sprites. Isabella, clumsy and out of place in her city shoes, struggled to keep up, her body aching with every step. But she didn't complain. She just watched and listened, and for the first time, she felt the quiet, powerful heartbeat of the natural world. A world so far removed from the steel and glass jungle she called home. The walk in the woods did more to soothe Isabella's frayed nerves than any sedative could have. The sheer, overwhelming reality of the forest, the scale of the trees, the intricate web of life underfoot, the clean, cold air put her own problems into a humbling perspective. Liam showed her how the snares worked. simple loops of wire designed to catch rabbits for their stew. He spoke of the forest with a deep, abiding respect, explaining how they only took what they needed, how every part of the animal was used. It was a philosophy of survival that was also a philosophy of reverence. This was a stark contrast to her world, where resources were things to be exploited, consumed, and discarded in the relentless pursuit of profit. As they walked back, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple. The beauty of it was so intense, so raw, that it made her ache. Back inside the cabin, the atmosphere was lighter. The shared experience, however brief, had forged a small bond between them. As Liam prepared a simple dinner of rabbit stew, the girls chattered happily, showing Isabella their collection of oddly shaped rocks and colorful leaves. She found herself smiling, a genuine, unforced smile that felt foreign on her face. She listened to their stories, asked them questions about their life, and for a little while, she forgot about the black SUVs and the man who wanted her dead. She was just a woman in a cabin with a kind man and his two lovely daughters. Later that evening, as the fire crackled and the girls readied for bed, Liam found an old, battery-powered radio. He fiddled with the dial, the speaker emitting bursts of static, until, finally, a clear voice emerged. It was a news broadcast. He was hoping for a weather report, some indication of when the roads might be clear. But the first words he heard made his blood run cold. Still no word on the whereabouts of billionaire heiress Isabella Vance, the newscaster's voice announced, crisp and detached. Miss Vance, the 28-year-old CEO of Vance Global, disappeared 2 days ago after a contentious board meeting. Her uncle, Arthur Vance, has issued a public plea for her safe return. On cue, a photo flashed across the small grainy screen. It was her, the woman sitting not 10 feet away from him, wearing his late wife's jacket. The face was the same, though in the photo it was framed by perfectly styled hair and adorned with subtle, expensive jewelry. Her expression was one of cool, detached power. It was the face of a queen, a world away from the frightened, vulnerable woman he had been protecting. The room fell silent. Isabella stared at her own image on the screen, a ghost from a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. The secret was out, and the name of her monster, Arthur Vance, was now known. The silence that descended upon the cabin was heavier and more profound than any before. It was a silence filled with the deafening roar of a newly revealed truth. Liam stared at the radio as if it were a venomous snake, the newscaster's words echoing in the small space. A billionaire heiress, CEO of Vance Global. The phrases were absurd, nonsensical, in the context of their rugged, simple existence. He looked at Isabella, truly looked at her, and suddenly, details he had overlooked snapped into sharp focus. The manicured nails, the subtle, aristocratic turn of her wrist, the inherent authority in her voice, even when she was terrified. He had been so focused on her as a victim, a patient, that he had failed to see the titan of industry hiding in plain sight. Amy and Renee looked back and forth between the radio, the woman, and their father, their young minds struggling to connect the glamorous photo with the quiet, sad lady who had held their carved bird. Isabella finally broke the silence, her voice barely a whisper. "My name is Isabella Vance." It was a confession, an apology, and a plea all in one. She looked at Liam, her eyes begging for him to understand, to not see her differently. But how could he not? The danger had just escalated exponentially. This wasn't a domestic dispute or a random act of violence. This was a corporate power play with stakes so high they were measured in billions of dollars. The men in the black SUVs weren't just thugs. They were professionals, operatives, working for a man who could buy anything and anyone. Liam felt a cold dread creep into his heart. It was a fear not for himself, but for his daughters. He had brought them to this remote place to protect them from the harshness of the world, and now the harshest part of that world had found them. He slowly rose to his feet and walked over to the radio, switching it off with a decisive click. The room was plunged back into silence, but this time it was a silence of decision. He had a choice to make. He could take her to the nearest town, hand her over to the authorities, and wash his hands of this terrifying affair. Or he could stand by the promise he had made. "You're safe here." The weight of that promise now felt impossibly heavy. Isabella watched Liam's face, searching for a sign of what he was thinking. She saw the conflict in his eyes, the flicker of fear, and the solid bedrock of resolve beneath it. She braced herself for the inevitable. She expected him to tell her to leave, to demand that she take her dangerous world far away from his family. It was what she deserved. It was the logical, sensible thing to do. She had brought this plague upon his house, and it was his duty to protect his children. She wouldn't even blame him. "My uncle," she began, the words tumbling out in a rush, as if saying them aloud would somehow lessen their terrible power. "His name is Arthur. He wants the company. He tried to have me killed. He arranged a hiking accident, but I got away. His men, the men in the SUV, they're his. They won't stop until they find me." She laid the truth bare, a desperate, last-ditch effort to be truly seen, not as a headline or a fortune, but as a person in mortal danger. Liam listened, his expression unmoving. He walked to the window and stared out into the impenetrable darkness of the forest. The woods that had been his refuge now felt like a cage, a hunting ground where they were the prey. He thought of his wife, Sarah. She had been a fierce believer in doing the right thing, no matter the cost. "You never walk away from someone in need, Liam," she used to say. "That's not who we are." Her voice was a clear, steady echo in his mind, a moral compass pointing true north. He turned back to face Isabella. His gaze fell upon his daughters, who were now standing beside her, as if instinctively forming a protective circle. Renee had taken Isabella's hand, a small gesture of solidarity that spoke volumes. In that moment, Liam's choice was no longer a choice. It was an inevitability. It was who he was. "He won't find you," Liam said, his voice quiet but resonant with unshakable conviction. "This is my home. These are my woods. Here, his money and his power mean nothing. We'll protect you." Isabella stared at him, stunned. She had expected rejection, anger, and fear. She had not expected this fierce, unconditional loyalty. It was a gift so profound, so undeserved, that it broke through the last of her defenses. A single tear, hot and cleansing, escaped and traced a path through the grime on her cheek. It was the first tear she had shed in a decade. The confession and Liam's subsequent pledge solidified their bond, transforming them from strangers into allies. The dynamic in the cabin shifted. The fear was still present, a low hum beneath the surface, but it was now overlaid with a sense of shared purpose. Isabella, emboldened by Liam's resolve, began to share more details. She spoke of her uncle's security chief, a former Special Forces operative named Marcus, a man utterly ruthless and loyal only to Arthur's money. "He's smart," she warned. "He's patient. He'll use logic, tracking, and elimination. He'll have satellite imagery, thermal scans. He'll treat this like a military operation." As she spoke, Liam listened, not with intimidation, but with the focused attention of a strategist. His past, the one he had tried to leave behind, was reasserting itself not as a source of pain, but as a vital tool for survival. He had been a combat medic in a special operations unit. He knew the tactics Marcus would use because he had been trained in them himself. The humble woodsman was, in his own way, just as formidable as the man hunting them. "The terrain is our best defense," Liam stated, unrolling an old, detailed topographical map of the region on the table. "Technology is useless if you can't get a foothold. The ravines, the thick undergrowth, the caves along the river, they won't show up on his satellite maps." He began to point out locations, his finger tracing paths through the dense green and brown markings. A plan began to form in his mind, a strategy of misdirection and evasion. He would use his intimate knowledge of the forest to become a ghost. Isabella watched him, a sense of awe growing within her. She was used to men who commanded others from behind desks, who wielded power through wealth and influence. Liam's power was different. It was elemental, rooted in the earth itself. It was the power of competence, of quiet confidence, of a deep, unshakable connection to his environment. He was the king of this small, wild kingdom, and she was under his protection. The fear didn't vanish, but for the first time, it felt manageable. It felt like they had a fighting chance. With a plan in mind, a new energy infused the cabin. Liam began to prepare a go bag for each of them, a small pack with water, dried food, a fire starter, and a thermal blanket. He was preparing for the possibility that they would have to abandon the cabin and disappear into the wilderness. He moved with a quiet efficiency that was both calming and deeply serious. He was no longer just a father protecting his home. He was a soldier preparing a battlefield. While he worked, Isabella found her own way to contribute. She couldn't track or fight, but she could think. She could analyze her enemy. "Arthur is arrogant," she explained, her voice sharp with a newfound clarity. "He believes money can solve any problem. He will have given Marcus a blank check, but also a timeline. He'll want this dealt with quickly and quietly before the media starts asking more questions. That pressure will make Marcus take risks." She was providing psychological intelligence, profiling the man who was pulling the strings. It was a language Liam understood perfectly. As they talked, Amy and Renee took on their own roles. They helped their father pack, their small hands carefully folding blankets and counting out ration bars. They weren't just scared children anymore. They were part of the team. Their resilience was a quiet testament to the strength Liam had instilled in them. Later, as Liam was cleaning his hunting rifle, a tool he now viewed in a much more somber light, Isabella approached him. "I never even learned how to build a fire," she said, her voice soft with self-recrimination. "My entire life, I've had people do things for me. I don't know how to survive." Liam stopped what he was doing and looked at her. "You survived your uncle," he said simply. "You survived his men in the woods. You survived a gunshot and a head wound. You're still here. You know more about survival than you think." His words were not meant as a platitude. They were a statement of fact, a recognition of an inner strength she had never acknowledged in herself. She had always equated strength with control, with power over others. Liam was showing her that true strength was about endurance, about the simple, stubborn refusal to be broken. It was a lesson more valuable than any she had learned in a boardroom. The next morning brought a tense, watchful calm. The sky was a clear, brilliant blue, a stark, almost mocking contrast to the fear that gripped them. Liam decided they couldn't wait for the enemy to come to them. They needed to be proactive. "I'm going to do a reconnaissance run," he announced. "I need to see how many there are and where they're concentrating their search." Isabella immediately protested. "You can't go alone. It's too dangerous. It's more dangerous for you to be seen, he countered gently. And I won't be seen. I know how to move out there. He looked at his daughters. Girls, you're in charge of keeping our guests safe. No one opens the door. No one makes a sound. Understand? They both nodded, their faces serious. They understood the gravity of the situation completely. Before he left, he handed Isabella a small walkie-talkie. This has a short range, maybe a mile. If you see anything at all, you press this button twice. Don't speak. Just 2 clicks. I'll hear it, and I'll come back. He slipped out of the cabin like a shadow, disappearing into the dense woods without a sound. Isabella was left alone with the 2 girls, the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. For the first time in her life, she was the designated protector. She, who had always been protected, was now the guardian. The irony was not lost on her. The hours crawled by. The silence in the cabin was a living thing, amplifying every sound from the forest outside. Isabella and the girls sat at the table, playing a quiet card game, but their eyes kept darting to the windows. Every rustle of leaves, every bird call, sounded like a threat. At one point, Renee, holding the small wooden bird Isabella now kept with her, looked up and asked, "Will Daddy be okay?" Isabella looked into the child's trusting eyes and found a strength she didn't know she possessed. "Your father is the strongest man I've ever met," she said, the words ringing with absolute sincerity. "He'll be okay." Saying it aloud, she realized she believed it. And in that moment, she wasn't just reassuring a child, she was reassuring herself. Liam moved through the undergrowth with a preternatural quietness, his feet finding purchase on the damp earth without snapping a twig. This was his element. He was not an intruder here. He was part of the forest's fabric. He climbed to a high ridge that overlooked the valley, concealing himself in a dense thicket of ferns. From this vantage point, he had a clear view of the access road and the surrounding area. It didn't take long. He spotted them. 2 black SUVs were parked at the trailhead a few miles down the road. 4 men, dressed in tactical gear, were studying a map. One of them, a tall man with a severe, disciplined posture, was clearly in charge. Marcus. He was pointing, directing the others, organizing a grid search. They were systematic, professional, and they were slowly but surely making their way towards his location. Liam watched them, his mind cold and analytical. He assessed their equipment, their movements, and their apparent strategy. They were good, but they were city-bred. They moved through the woods like an occupying army, relying on technology and force. They didn't understand the forest language, its hidden paths, its subtle deceptions. That was his advantage. He noted their positions and then began to circle back towards the cabin, taking a wide, circuitous route. He paused to create a false trail, scuffing leaves and breaking a few branches to lead them eastward, away from his home. It was a small deception, but it would buy them time. As he moved, a memory from his service surfaced. He remembered his commanding officer telling him, "The battlefield isn't just the ground under your feet. It's the space between the enemy's ears. Get in there, and you can win without firing a shot." That was his new mission. Not just to hide, but to control the narrative, to manipulate the hunters, to turn their own strengths, their reliance on logic and patterns against them. He was no longer just defending his family. He was going on the offensive, and his weapon was the wilderness itself. Back at the cabin, the tension had reached a fever pitch. A noise from outside, closed this time, had sent them all into a state of silent panic. It was the distinct sound of someone moving through the brush, heavy-footed and clumsy. Not an animal, and not Liam. Isabella herded the girls into the small root cellar, hidden beneath a rug in the floor, a place they had used as a storm shelter. "Stay here and don't make a sound until I come and get you," she whispered, her voice tight with fear. She closed the heavy wooden door over them, plunging them into darkness. Her heart was hammering against her ribs. She was alone, unarmed, the sole guardian of the cabin. She grabbed the heaviest cast-iron skillet from the kitchen, its weight a pathetic but comforting presence in her hand. She flattened herself against the wall next to the door, her breathing shallow, her ears straining. The footsteps grew closer, then stopped right outside the door. Silence. An eternity seemed to pass. Then, a sharp, authoritative knock. Isabella flinched, her knuckles white as she gripped the skillet. The knock came again, louder this time. She held her breath, praying they would assume the cabin was empty and move on. "We know you're in there," a man's voice called out, cold and devoid of emotion. "This is private property. We're part of the county search and rescue. We're looking for a lost hiker." It was a lie, a plausible, well-rehearsed lie. Isabella's mind raced. If she didn't answer, they might break down the door. If she did, what could she possibly say? She thought of Liam. What would he do? He would be calm. He would be smart. Suddenly, from the woods behind the cabin, a sharp, piercing whistle cut through the air. A bird call. But not a normal one. It was a signal. Liam's signal. A moment later, she heard the man outside curse under his breath. His radio crackled to life. "All units, fall back to the rally point. We have a new lead." The footsteps receded, quickly this time. Isabella waited, her body trembling, until the sound was gone completely. She slowly sagged against the wall, the skillet clattering to the floor. Liam had done it. He had drawn them away. He had saved them without ever being seen. When Liam finally slipped back into the cabin an hour later, he found Isabella sitting at the table, her face pale but her eyes blazing with a new kind of fire. He briefly explained what he had done, how he had used a series of calls and signs to create a convincing false trail miles away from their location, a trail that Marcus's men would be obligated to follow. "It won't hold them for long," he said, his tone grim. "Marcus is too smart. He'll realize it's a deception eventually. We've bought ourselves maybe a day, 2 at most. But a day was a lifetime. It was time to think, to plan their next move." Isabella, however, was no longer content to be a passive pawn in this game. The experience of being hunted, of being solely responsible for the children's safety, had changed her. It had forged her fear into a weapon. "We can't just keep hiding, Liam," she said, her voice steady and strong. "We have to fight back, not with guns, but with information. My uncle's greatest strength is his control over the narrative. He's painting himself as the concerned relative. We need to destroy that narrative." She began to pace the small cabin, her mind so accustomed to corporate strategy, now applying itself to a different kind of war. "There's a board member," she said, thinking aloud. "Her name is Eleanor Vance, a distant cousin of my father's. She's old school, values integrity above all else. She never trusted Arthur. If I could get a message to her, if I could tell her what happened, she would believe me. She has the influence on the board to challenge him, to launch an internal investigation." The problem was communication. The storm had knocked out the landline. They had no cell service this deep in the woods, and any attempt to drive to a town would be suicidal. They were completely isolated. "There has to be a way," she muttered, frustration creeping into her voice. And then, her eyes widened in a flash of sudden, brilliant memory. "My jacket," she said, rushing to the coat she had been wearing when she arrived. "My father was paranoid. He had, He had a panic button, a satellite beacon, stitched into the lining of all my outdoor gear. With trembling fingers, she felt along the seams of the expensive jacket. There, hidden beneath a waterproof flap, was a small, hard square. It was a one-way communication device, capable of sending a single, pre-programmed emergency text message to a designated number, and the designated number belonged to the one person her father had trusted implicitly, Eleanor Vance. The discovery of the satellite beacon shifted the entire paradigm of their situation. Hope, real and tangible, flooded the cabin. But it also presented a new, immediate danger. Activating it will send out a GPS signal, Liam warned, his expression serious. Marcus will have the technology to intercept that signal. The moment you press that button, he'll know our exact location. We'll have minutes, maybe less, before they descend on us. They couldn't just press the button and wait. They had to use the activation as part of a larger plan. It would be the trigger, the starting gun for their final, desperate gambit. For the rest of the day, they planned. It was a collaboration of two vastly different minds. Isabella, the strategist, outlined the corporate fallout, predicting how Eleanor would react, how she would leverage the information to corner Arthur. She drafted a concise, powerful message that would leave no room for doubt. Arthur tried to kill me. Location signal is proof of containment. Initiate Vance Protocol 7. Trust no one. Vance Protocol 7 was a deep-level contingency plan her father had created to protect the company from a hostile internal takeover, a plan only she and Eleanor knew existed. Liam, the tactician, focused on the physical reality of the next few hours. He planned their escape route, a difficult, treacherous path through the dense forest, across a shallow river, and into a network of small caves on the other side. A place where they could hide, a place where vehicles couldn't follow. We'll activate the beacon and run, he explained, pointing to the map. We'll use the signal to draw them here, to the cabin. It will give us the head start we need to get to the caves before they can regroup and track us on foot. It was an all-or-nothing plan, fraught with risk. If they were too slow, if Marcus anticipated their move, they would be caught in the open. As dusk began to fall, a somber quiet settled over them. They ate a final meal in the cabin that had become their sanctuary. Liam looked at his daughters, their innocent faces full of trust in him, and his heart ached. Isabella looked at this family that has saved her, that has shown her a world beyond her own gilded cage. She was no longer just fighting for her life or her company. She was fighting for them. The time had come. Liam gathered the girls. Isabella took a deep breath, her finger hovering over the hidden button. Their eyes met across the room, a silent, shared understanding. It was time to bring the storm to their enemies. With a final, decisive push, Isabella pressed a button. A tiny, almost imperceptible click was the only sound, but it felt like a cannon blast in the silent cabin. A small LED light on the device blinked green once, confirming the signal had been sent. The clock was ticking. Go, 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 Liam urged, his voice a low, urgent command. He ushered the girls out the back door, Isabella right behind them. They plunged into the deepening twilight of the forest, Liam in the lead, setting a punishing pace. The woods, which had been a place of peace and beauty, were now an obstacle course, a shadowy maze filled with unseen threats. Branches whipped at their faces, and roots seemed to grab at their ankles. Isabella, her body still weak from her injuries, struggled to keep up. Her lungs burned, and every step sent a jolt of pain through her. But she didn't stop. She looked ahead at the determined set of Liam's back, at the small, brave figures of his daughters scurrying to keep up, and she found a reserve of strength she never knew she possessed. She thought of Eleanor, a formidable woman with a will of iron. The message was sent. The wheels were in motion. In the world of corporate power, a silent, bloodless coup was beginning. But here, in the primal darkness of the forest, the battle was one of flesh and blood, of survival. Behind them, they heard the first faint distant sound of engines, a low growl that was steadily growing louder. The beacon had worked. Marcus and his men were coming. They were converging on the empty cabin, on the ghost they had left behind. The sound spurred them on, adrenaline overriding their exhaustion. They ran faster, deeper into the wild, the sounds of their pursuers a terrifying drumbeat at their backs. Liam led them to the river's edge. The water was cold and fast-moving, a black churning ribbon in the moonlight. "We have to cross," he said, his voice breathless. "It'll wash away our scent, confuse their tracking. Stay close." He lifted Renee into his arms, and Amy grabbed onto his belt. Isabella, her heart pounding, plunged into the icy water after them. The cold was a shock, a brutal, numbing embrace, but they pushed on, fighting the current, their only goal, the dark, silent caves on the far side. The river crossing nearly broke them. The current was strong, tugging at their legs, and the rocks underfoot were slick and treacherous. Isabella slipped, going under for a terrifying second, before Liam's strong hand grabbed the back of her jacket and hauled her up, sputtering and gasping. They finally collapsed on the opposite bank, soaked, freezing, and utterly exhausted. But they were across. They had put a significant barrier between themselves and their pursuers. Liam didn't let them rest for long. "Come on, almost there," he urged, his voice a ragged whisper. He led them up a steep embankment and into a narrow fissure in the rock face, nearly invisible in the darkness. The opening led to a small network of dry, sheltered caves. It was a place Liam and the girls had discovered years ago, their secret fort. Now it was their last refuge. They huddled together in the darkness, shivering, listening. The sounds of the hunt were clearer now from across the river. They could hear shouts, the beams of powerful flashlights cutting through the trees. Marcus and his men had discovered the empty cabin and were fanning out, searching for a trail. "They found our tracks leading to the river," Liam whispered, his ear pressed to the rock. "They're trying to figure out where we crossed." A tense waiting game began. In the cold, damp darkness of the cave, Isabella's mind drifted back to another dark, quiet room. A flashback. It was the night her father died. He had called her into his study, the room smelling of old books and his favorite cigar. He looked tired, older than his years. "Bella," he had said, using his pet name for her, "this company, it's a beast. It has a life of its own. It will try to consume you. Don't let it. The most important asset isn't in any of our buildings. It's in here." He had tapped his chest, right over his heart. "Don't ever lose that." She hadn't understood him then. She had thought he was being sentimental, weakened by his illness. Now, huddled in a cave with a family who had nothing and yet had everything, she finally understood. Her father hadn't been talking about love. He had been talking about humanity, and she had almost lost hers completely. A new resolve hardened within her. She wasn't just going to win back her company. She was going to remake it in the image of her father's last wish, in the image of the kindness she had been shown here. The sounds from across the river intensified. The hunters were getting frustrated. They had been outmaneuvered, made to look like amateurs by a single man and his knowledge of the terrain. Isabella could almost picture Marcus's face, a mask of cold fury. His professionalism would be warring with his bruised ego. In the cave, Liam worked to make them more comfortable. He unpacked the thermal blankets from the go-backs, wrapping them around his shivering daughters. He gave one to Isabella, his touch gentle on her shoulder. "We just have to wait them out," he murmured. "They can't search this whole area in the dark. They'll have to pull back until morning." The hours passed with agonizing slowness. The girls, exhausted, finally drifted off to sleep, curled up together like two small animals in a burrow. Liam and Isabella sat in silence, a silent vigil in the dark. "Thank you," Isabella whispered, the words seeming inadequate for the depth of her gratitude. "You've saved my life. You've risked everything for a stranger." Liam looked at her, his face barely visible in the faint moonlight filtering into the cave entrance. "You're not a stranger anymore," he said. "And I wasn't just protecting you. I was protecting the world I want my daughters to grow up in. A world where people help each other, where kindness isn't a weakness." His words struck a deep chord within her. He wasn't just a good man. He was a man with a deeply ingrained moral philosophy, a philosophy he lived every single day. He was everything her uncle was not. He was everything she now aspired to be. Suddenly, a new sound cut through the night. It wasn't the sound of Marcus's men. It was the unmistakable, rhythmic whump 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 of a helicopter. A powerful searchlight cut through the darkness, sweeping across the treetops. Isabella's heart leaped into her throat. Had Arthur sent air support? But Liam shook his head, a slow smile spreading across his face. "That's not a civilian chopper," he said, his voice filled with relief. "That's law enforcement." Eleanor came through. The searchlight swept over the area where Marcus and his men were searching. A voice, amplified by a loudspeaker, boomed across the valley. "This is the state police. Lay down your weapons and put your hands in the air." The hunters had become the hunted. The siege was over. The aftermath was a blur of flashing lights and official voices. The state police, acting on the information provided by Eleanor Vance and corroborated by the GPS signal from Isabella's beacon, had moved in with overwhelming force. From their hiding spot in the caves, Liam, Isabella, and the girls watched as Marcus and his men were taken into custody, their tactical gear and weapons a stark admission of their guilt. It was a quiet, efficient operation. The threat that had terrorized them for days was neutralized in a matter of minutes. As dawn broke, a female officer, guided by the GPS coordinates, made her way to the caves. "Isabella Vance?" she asked, her voice professional but not unkind. Isabella stepped out into the morning light, blinking against the sudden brightness. She was no longer a victim hiding in the dark. "I'm here," she said, her voice clear and strong. The world descended on them then. More police, paramedics to check on Isabella's injuries, and eventually the first news vans, drawn like moths to the flame of a dramatic story. The quiet solitude of Liam's woods was shattered. But through it all, Liam and his daughters stood by her side, a silent, steadying presence. They led the officers back to the cabin, which was now a crime scene, being meticulously processed for evidence. Isabella gave her statement, her account of the kidnapping and attempted murder, delivered with a calm, unshakable clarity. When the questions were over, a well-dressed man in a suit approached her. He was from her company, sent by Eleanor. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice full of relief, "we have a jet waiting to take you back to the city. Your uncle has been detained. The board is convening an emergency session." It was the summons she had been waiting for, the call to return to her world, to her power. But as she looked at the waiting helicopter, she felt a surprising reluctance. She turned to Liam. "I have to go," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "But this isn't over." He simply nodded, his eyes conveying an understanding that needed no words. He knew her fight was just beginning. She knelt to face Amy and Renee. "You two are the bravest girls I have ever met," she told them, her voice cracking. Thank you for finding me." She pressed the small carved wooden bird back into Amy's hand. "You should keep this. It belongs in a place where courage lives." As she walked towards the helicopter, the roar of its blades washing over her, she took one last look back at the humble cabin, at the simple man and his two extraordinary daughters. She had arrived broken and bleeding, a refugee from her own life. She was leaving as a survivor, a warrior, with a new understanding of what it meant to be truly wealthy. The return to New York was a jarring transition from the quiet rhythms of the forest to the frantic, relentless energy of the city. Within hours of landing, Isabella Vance, cleaned up and dressed in a power suit provided by her assistant, walked into the Vance Global boardroom. The atmosphere was electric with tension. Her uncle, Arthur, was absent, his chair conspicuously empty. The board members, a collection of the most powerful men and women in the corporate world, fell silent as she entered. They saw a different woman from the one who had left a few days ago. The cool, detached heiress was gone. In her place stood a woman whose eyes held the cold fire of someone who had faced death and emerged stronger. She didn't speak of spreadsheets or profit margins. She spoke of her uncle's betrayal, her voice never wavering. She spoke of the greed that had poisoned the heart of their company. And then, she spoke of a man and his two daughters who lived in a cabin in the woods. They had nothing, she said, her voice softening. And yet, they gave me everything. They showed me that the true assets of this company are not our stock price or our market share, but our integrity, our humanity. And we have failed to protect those assets. Her words hung in the air, a stunning departure from the usual boardroom rhetoric. She then laid out her vision for the future, a company that was not just profitable, but purposeful. She announced the immediate creation of the Sarah Hale Foundation, named in honor of Liam's late wife, a multi-billion-dollar initiative dedicated to environmental restoration and providing essential services to underserved rural communities. Our new bottom line, she concluded, will be the positive impact we have on the world. There were no arguments. There was no dissent. They saw her conviction, her unshakable moral authority. They saw a true leader. In a unanimous vote, her control of Vance Global was solidified, absolute, and unquestioned. She had won the war, but she knew her most important work was just beginning. Weeks turned into a month. Isabella threw herself into her work with a ferocity and passion she had never known. She was dismantling the old, ruthless culture of Vance Global and rebuilding it from the ground up. She promoted people of integrity, fired the sycophants who had enabled her uncle's greed, and made the Sarah Hale Foundation the centerpiece of the company's new identity. She was a constant presence in the news, no longer as a socialite, but as a visionary business leader, a force for change. But every night, when she returned to her vast, silent penthouse overlooking the city, she felt a profound sense of emptiness. The luxury that had once defined her now felt hollow, meaningless. She missed the smell of wood smoke, the taste of simple stew, the sound of children's laughter. She missed the quiet strength of the man who had shown her what true strength was. One day, she canceled all her meetings, boarded her private jet, and flew to the small regional airport nearest the woods. She rented an unassuming car and drove herself down the familiar, winding dirt road. She found Liam and the girls on the front porch of the cabin, repairing a broken step. They looked up as she approached, not with surprise, but with warm, welcoming smiles, as if they had been expecting her. She wasn't wearing a suit. She was in simple jeans and a sweater. Liam nodded a greeting. "Isabella," he said, his voice calm and steady as always. Amy and Renee ran to her, wrapping their arms around her legs in an enthusiastic hug that melted the last of the ice around her heart. "We missed you," they said in unison. "I missed you too," she replied, her voice thick. "More than you know." Isabella stayed for the rest of the day. There was no talk of business or boardrooms. She helped Liam fix the porch step, her hands, now accustomed to signing multi-million-dollar contracts, learning the simple, satisfying work of hammering a nail. She played hide-and-seek with the girls in the woods, her laughter echoing through the trees, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. As the sun began to set, they sat together on the newly repaired porch, drinking fresh squeezed lemonade. "I want to give you something," Isabella said, her tone serious now. "Anything you want. A new house, a trust fund for the girls' education, a lifetime of financial security. Name it, and it's yours. I owe you everything." Liam looked out at the forest, a gentle smile on his face. He was quiet for a long time. "We have everything we need right here, Isabella," he said finally, his gaze sweeping over his home, his daughters. "We have each other. We have this place. You don't owe us anything." It was the answer she had expected, the answer she had hoped for. It was the final lesson. He was a man utterly immune to the temptations of her world. His wealth was of a different, more profound kind. "I know," she said softly, "but the foundation, the Sarah Hale Foundation, it's real. It's already helping people. Her name, her memory, is doing so much good in the world. I wanted you to know that." A flicker of deep, heartfelt emotion crossed Liam's face. He had lost his wife, but her spirit of kindness and care was now touching countless lives. It was a form of immortality, a legacy of love. He simply nodded, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Thank you," he whispered. That was all he needed to say. Isabella didn't offer money again. Instead, she offered something far more valuable, her time. She started visiting the cabin regularly, not as a billionaire benefactor, but as a friend. She would arrive with groceries and books for the girls, but she would also arrive with a willingness to work. She helped Liam chop wood, tend his garden, and repair the roof. She was slowly, deliberately learning the language of self-sufficiency, of a life connected to the earth. In turn, she brought a piece of the outside world to them. She told them stories of her travels, of the projects the foundation was funding. She was building a bridge between her two worlds, weaving them together. The girls adored her. She was their fun, adventurous aunt who knew about strange, far-off places. They didn't see a CEO. They saw Bella, the woman who would make silly faces and wasn't afraid to get her hands dirty. For Liam, her presence filled a void in the cabin he hadn't realized was so vast. He saw the way she looked at his daughters, with genuine love and affection. He saw the joy and peace that settled on her face when she was there, a peace that her life of power and prestige could never provide. They would often sit on the porch in the evenings after the girls were asleep, talking for hours. He spoke more of Sarah, sharing memories of their life. Isabella spoke of her father, of the pressures and loneliness of her childhood. They were two people from opposite ends of the universe, finding common ground in their shared experiences of loss and their search for a meaningful life. A quiet, unspoken bond grew between them, a bond of mutual respect, deep affection, and shared healing. The cabin was no longer just a refuge for her. It was becoming a home. One crisp autumn evening, a year after she had first stumbled out of the woods, Isabella was sitting with Liam and the girls on the porch, watching a spectacular sunset. The trees were ablaze with color, a fiery testament to the changing seasons. A year ago, she had been running for her life, terrified and alone. Now, she was surrounded by a family she had chosen, in a place that had healed her soul. She had successfully transformed her company. Vance Global was now a leader in corporate responsibility, and the Sarah Hale Foundation was a global force for good. She had defeated her demons, both internal and external. But she knew, with a certainty that resonated in the deepest part of her being, that this was her greatest success. This quiet moment on this humble porch was the pinnacle of her achievements. "Do you remember the first night I was here?" she asked Liam, her voice soft. "I was so scared. I thought you were my enemy." Liam smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "I remember a woman who was stronger than she knew," he replied. "You just needed a safe place to find that strength." Amy and Renee, snuggled between them, were listening. "You weren't a stranger," Renee said, matter-of-factly. "You were just lost. We're glad we found you." Isabella's heart felt so full it might burst. The simple, profound truth in the child's words summed up her entire journey. She had been lost in a world of wealth and power, and she had been found in a world of love and kindness. She had finally found her true north. She belonged. Sometimes, the greatest rescue isn't about saving a life, but about discovering your own. It's about realizing that a home is not a place, but a feeling of being truly seen.